Okay, so today we are going to do an orientation, you might say, to the revelations of the Bhagavad Gita that are now coming. The journey from the individual to the universal. This, of course, is very fundamental because this is the journey I traveled. And when the universe opened up and the divine love came and the forces and the powers and the showings that happened in that process indicated a state of consciousness that I had no idea of before. I mean, I had meditated. I had been with Meher Baba. I'd spent 6 years with him. Meditation was a part of my life. But at that point, 25 years later, it had, as if a veil parted. And I recognize that now that I live in the immediacy of the universal forces and principles and consciousness and planes and the rest of it. I've spent much of the last 13 years in this work trying to bring it down, trying to bring it in myself and in the work that I do with all of you. And of course, the nature of that is that then those forces have a channel, a modality by which they can come into the collective consciousness. And one force in particular is that which is aligned with the principle of the avatar, the principle of Krishna consciousness or the Supreme Being. When I first read the Bhagavad Gita, it was entirely recognition. It was a showing, even though my conscious mind couldn't understand it. Because at this point, I had just met my teacher and it was all new. Everything was new, and my experiential was in the way of me seeing all that was being revealed to me. But in time, it became a foundational recognition that this is an innate path of the soul. All of humanity, at some point in its evolution, will travel the path that the Bhagavad Gita points to. So it's not so much the mental understanding and the scripture itself and the teachings that have arisen from that, but the principle that you connect to is as if it's a rosette stone that translates the language that's beyond us into something accessible to us, that shows us a way preparing ourselves for what is possible, what in fact lays innate as a potential in every self-aware human being. The very principle of the Bhagavad Gita is that our self-awareness itself, that means I exist, I'm here now, points to an eternal reality. That if we can learn to align with that potentiality within ourselves, the universe finds a path to us and shows us that path of the soul, that journey of consciousness. So today I will want to speak to this using the Bhagavad Gita. I'm going to draw on the stages the Bhagavad Gita points to, and I've spoken of this in other teachings many times. But I do need to recognize that what is the indicator that lets us know, each of us know, that we are transitioning from our individual awakening to whatever maturity and stability and integration in our own individual awakening we've come to something more, something greater, something not yet known. And in the end of the 6th chapter of the Gita, which is the conclusion of the individual's journey to maturity, to yoga, to the path of personal yoga, the conscious, purposeful living and organization of your life in order to become or align with that which is the source of our seeking. And that has the stages of dejection, discernment, yogic action, the knowledge that comes in that process, the unfolding of that knowledge. And then the renunciation, the relinquishing, the falling away of the things of our egoic life that we had so made important lose their importance. And we find ourselves falling into a natural state of being, a coming to peace, a coming to presence, a sense of completion. So these are the samadhi of the self versus the samadhi of the ego. The journey is a movement, waking up from our absorption, our merger with our ego, into a possibility that we as a human being hadn't recognized before, and whatever be that battlefield, we meet it, find out about it, understand it, come to a relationship with it, and learn to align with it. This isn't something maybe many of you have done. Rather, it's something that has happened to you. What happens to you is a falling away of the life you've known, and you don't know why, and you don't know how to live without the life you've known. And that transition itself from ego to self, the self of the Gita points to, is a reflection of the same process as you enter into the universal path. The difference is the first part of the Gita requires effort. That means we have to work intelligently, gather information, change our behavior, shift our priorities, learn to handle the pressure of the ego's resistance to change, to letting go, our attachments, our positions, our absorption in what we think, our absorptions in our emotional body, our absorptions in our preferences and our habits and our strategies for survival. These all become our battlefield as we choose and keep choosing to go beyond the rule of that part of ourselves that is lost in that absorption. And we do this in two ways. By dismantling those parts of our ego that are resistant to our awakening, and by strengthening our connection, our felt sense to that which is awakening. And that is two avenues, two methods of doing that, through our awareness, our intelligence, our discernment, and the application of will, and through our direct experience of the deepening and the quieting of the very essence of what we are, through the practices, through the techniques, through the efforts that yoga points to. At some point, we reach a relative state of stability, a state that has to be maintained continuously because we're not yet free from those parts that have previously resisted, opposed, obscured us, but we're sufficiently free that we can find peace in certain situations. We can find relief in nature. We can find a connection to something within ourselves that gives us a strength that our ordinary ego would not be able to access. And there is, therefore, a completion in some sense. Because at this point, the human ego is now more under the guidance or the rule of the spiritual ego, the one you developed, the one you aligned with. This creates a spiritual self. In the Gita, it's a capital S versus the little s for the egoic ego. And this capital S then has a greater authority, greater capacity to be in existence as a consequence. All of this can happen within the domain of the practices and the traditions that are out there spiritually. The vast quantum, the exoteric teachings of all spirituality has been the practices, the mantras, the teachings. But there is an esoteric, an inner path that is only for a few that have committed the rest of their lives to live in relationship with the unfolding possibility of that greater self that has come to them. It may be for them an experience of God or a sense of God or awareness of a greater truth or a greater intelligence. It may be whatever the scripture you read, Allah or Buddha. It could be the ideal of those principles. And that is enough to hold us at that stage of the awakened self. And there becomes a stronger organization of our personality around that, what Aurobindo called central self. We find something of our own authority. We find the capacity to conquer the parts of ourselves that we hadn't even realized needed to be conquered, that they were so part of our assumption of our existence that we didn't even know they were a problem until we awakened to another consciousness than the one absorbed in the ego. This is not rocket science. This is intuitively accessible to anybody in any situation in life. Our growth in the course of our life is always a process of waking up to that which you did not yet know, learning its nature, understanding it, and then learning to change, to bring it into your life in new ways. Spirituality is no different. Our capacity to assert some degree of moderation or control over our human personality means that when we awaken, we are more capable of moving aligned with the awakening state. If not, then the awakening state becomes a battlefield. It becomes an arena of conflicts, of confusion, of doubt, of suspicion and distrust. Because there's not a central self that would know truth automatically yet. It gets veiled by the other compass of your old life. So how do you know? How do you get through these? The Bhagavad Gita didn't mention the principle of the enlightened master until know this knowledge from the enlightened master, which I believe is the 4th chapter right now. I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure. But that's the principle of someone who themselves has come to that awake state and have stabilized it. Because there's something in the very presence of these people that teaches you through a process of absorption, of entrainment, and strengthens that quality in you, that enlightened potential within yourself. So it's more accessible. When you sit with these people, it's easier to meditate. It's easier to take a different vantage point on what before you were lost in or overtaken by. But the critical role, the essential role of the transition from our own yoga, from our individual development, when we open up to the yoga of the universe, when we open up to the yoga of the Supreme Being, that what is needed more than anything else is a helping hand, a guiding light, a principle that in Indian tradition is called the guru, so that it can actually allow you to have some access in the same way the enlightened teacher has, but access to the forces of the universal yoga that cannot be found just in the writings and the teachings, can only be directly experienced through one who is capable, either in a past life or through their yoga, of accessing a principle of divine that is personal for you. Better yet, not a dead one. A living person who carries the possibility to their own attainment for you to hold on to be pulled by, to be lifted up by, to be taken suddenly beyond what you knew before and teach you how to hold it so that you can take yourself there. And what is this principle? A yogi, this is the end of chapter 6, verse 279. A yogi is superior to an ascetic, greater than a scholar, and also superior to man of ritualistic worship. Therefore, Arjuna, be a yogi. Of all the yogis, however, one who has ever linked with me in heart, and for me has love and faith, him I consider, or her, the greatest and most dear to me. This principle of being found, touched by a being that carries that universal within them is the secret, the keystone, the key that opens the doorway to the universal yoga. If that's there, then chapter 7 makes sense. Chapter 8 makes sense because they're maps of where this goes. A showing to get the collaboration of the ego that's aligned with the higher self. In the recognition that there's still an ego aligned with the lower self in that process. And therefore it actually points to another battlefield. A battlefield where our collective unconscious, our collective veils that live within each of us, our inherited ancestral structures, our mother, our father, their fathers, and so on back in time, are there in our bodies, are there in our present person. And this is our battlefield. So it's not enough to come to psychological health. It's not enough to be able to become effective in meditation or chanting or doing the techniques. It's calling us to a higher standard, a higher possibility. Our success in becoming a yogi often takes lives, many lives. And even then, each life we get overtaken and we have to crawl our way back up to what we attained before. So if we do recover what we had learned before, and we do have the grace of meeting a form that carries that possibility, then, unbeknownst to your ego, unbeknownst to your intelligence, unbeknownst to everything you have used to assess information or facts or experiences, something starts happening. When I was 19 and I opened that book in that ranch in Cazadero, California, with a bunch of other hippies who had infested it since the parents were gone. And that book was sitting on the table. I opened it up. And the opening up the book, little did I know that at that point I was ready. I had met the darkness. I was the darkness. Some great battle had gone on and I had lost. And when I opened that book, something happened. And it happened in the first few pages. But first it was like, who is this person who could say they're God speaking? It was like disdain. I mean, come on, let me see what this is about. And by the time I got to page 3 or 4 or 5, I knew there was something here. God was speaking to me. The devotion that was hidden in this life, not fully, but it was there, but had been hidden around the period of that age, spoke to me. And I could not put this large book down. Started reading in the evening and I didn't end until the morning. I now know it wasn't just because at that time I was a speed freak, but it was because something was speaking to me. I was drinking of a nectar that I didn't know existed. And when I went into my little room that I was staying in there was a picture of Mara Baba on the wall. And when I looked at his picture, when I saw his patience and love and wisdom, I knew my path. They say the Guru is the path, but it's only the path for those that can recognize him. In that moment, I recognized him. And that was my entry card to a journey that took, I stayed with Meher Baba for about 6 years. Then they told me that I wasn't ready and that I had to go back into life. And then 25 years after that. It was working in the background. It was a purposeful organization of my consciousness without knowing what it was. I came out of my addictions. I reorganized my life. I started applying disciplines that I had let aside. I married. I had a child. Became an architect. Discovered my capacities to learn, which I didn't know I had. Took forward the talents that came with me at that stage and expanded them, became an architect. Graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington. That was things that I never imagined were possible for me. Little did I know that the yoga of the universe is living life. That the yoga of the universe is the unwitting alignment because of a quality of having at some point been touched by that devotion for the universal being. The devotion to that is the path to becoming that. More powerful than awareness, more powerful than self-will, more powerful than effort. It is an inevitable movement that you wake up to as time progresses. When you wake up to it, then chapters from 7 to 18 start being sung to you. They start being in the words. You find the description of what role you have in the unfolding of that possibility within yourself. So the beginning of the 7th chapter, Jnana Vijnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge and the process of knowing, the Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, now hear from me how one who is exclusively linked with me and wants to strive further on the path of yoga, through my grace will attain full knowledge about me and become a perfect yogi. You'll become the object of your devotion. Devotion is a becoming, not a knowing alone. It's a becoming that includes the body. It includes the emotional nature. It includes the very cells and the organization of your existence as a being in a body, this life. It's that state of convincing absorption when it occurs. There is a recognition when it comes, usually glimpses or tastes. This, of course, could have occurred some periods of time in your period, in the earlier stages of your journey. Glimpses of oneness, breathtaking awe, being in touch with the miracle of existence, glimpses, but you can't hold on to it. You can't hold it. It comes. Maybe it lasts for a few moments, a few hours, a few days, weeks, a few years for few, and then it fades away because it's a showing of what's possible. These showings don't go away. The impression of meeting the universal forces is indelible. When they come, they accumulate. And they accumulate below your surface consciousness. They accumulate in the cells of your body. They become in itself a motivating principle that starts awakening a quality of aspiration and longing that is of a different order. You begin to see that each moment is the moment to live. You begin to recognize each moment is evidence of a purposeful unfolding of a miraculous possibility that is yet to show itself. But they in themselves are not enough. There's not an organization of even the self of the yogi can know what to do or not do to align with. There is the necessity for guidance. There is the necessity for understanding the nature of the journey. This is why Krishna kept speaking after the 6th chapter, because he needed Arjuna to be his universal self, to be what he was, to enter into this greater battlefield of the transition of the era that Krishna came in, the period of darkness that Krishna represented. We are in the same darkness, collectively. We are being prepared for a battle within our own personalities, within our own system, but also in our community, in the lives we live, wherever place we are still associated with. It's all under attack. And it so seems an attack, but really these are just consequences of ignorance. They are just ways of living not aligned with the possibility of life, accumulating and coming up to be met and to be learned from and to evolve with, or to be destroyed and reset and started again. So the paradigm for your existence is different as you enter the yoga of the universal, the yoga of the Supreme Being. The holding by its design becomes of a different order than the holding of your enlightened ego over your unenlightened ego. Though it's the same holding, because the unenlightened ego keeps carried along until the roots of your resistance and your fears and your needs and your desires and your rationalizations and justifications and your projections and your shallow unexamined components and the dark subterranean forces that are in each body are still there. They're still veiling, still obscuring, and will rise up if you don't continue to strengthen the fact that every moment matters, that everything that's arising has a purpose. It is not necessarily going to be aligned with the purpose we would want. As a matter of fact, often when you truly are in this yoga, it is exactly the opposite of what you would want. But somehow, something awakens in you that can say yes to that. This is what's arising. To be with this, to meet this, to discover the hidden secrets of it, to learn the lessons before nature teaches it to you somewhere in your many lives, to recover the lessons learned but forgotten. I shall tell you everything about this knowledge along with the process of realizing it, so there'll be nothing left for you to know. Nothing left to know. There's only three principles in place with everything. The knower, the process of knowing, and the object of that knowing. When the knower, through the process, knows the object, then the object becomes the knower, and knowledge, the need for knowledge ends. And there is only one knowing that we strive for, that we wish to experience, that we wish to embrace, that we wish to become. And that is the basic principle of the yoga of the Supreme. The end game, the completion of all the lives, into the fullness of an inherent latent possibility that was there within you and in every living being, to varying degrees of possibility. Yet, among thousands of people, one or two strive for the spiritual path, and those who strive and attain perfection, one or two continue to know me and the secrets of my existence. This chapter was the beginning of Krishna revealing his nature. I'm not going to go into the whole chapter, I'll do that later. But I will say something about the nature of this yoga of the Supreme, because Krishna was a manifestation of the Supreme Being. He was a human being that was also the Supreme Being. He was fully a human being. He was a king, and he had consorts, and he had wealth, and he had powers. And he was a divine being. And he wore a veil. In his human, he used his human as a veil. Because of ignorance, people are not able to realize my unmanifest nature and believe that I have assumed a finite form by birth. They are unable to know me, the Supreme Being, beyond the reach of mind and senses. So I'll say this a little different, because this is his call in this chapter. Because of ignorance, you are not able to know your unmanifest nature and believe that you have assumed a finite form by birth. You are unable to know yourself as the Supreme Being beyond the reach of mind and senses, veiled by Yoga Maya. This is hidden from all. Arjuna, right from birth, all beings are deluded due to attraction, repulsion, and confusion and attachment. But due to their virtuous deeds, those who are free from sin are not deluded by this Maya and worship me with strong faith and devotion. Those are the key words. Knowledge follows. Faith leads. Devotion pulls. Knowledge is at the rear, in this case. The bow of the ship that traverses the ocean of samsara is faith. The ability to keep going despite all resistances. The faith in the process of traversing releases, opens up possibilities. This possibility that takes us beyond mind and senses, our belief system, our structures of how we should be and how they should be and the rest of it. We begin to feel a potentiality, a possibility, a sense of connection, a sense of truth, coming into a felt sense of love, devotion, worship. And then it is in the stern of the boat, when the consciousness turns away from the bow, that's where you get, oh, that's what happened. Oh, that's what was shown. Oh, that's what I understand this means. So it's not knowledge that leads. It's not personal will that leads. Because the ship is already moving. We're in a current of becoming. Now are those who've come to that state, who've traversed the territory, they come back and they bring their raft to shore and they take on people and they ride the current, often rapids, coming to the tranquil waters and then the ocean. And then that being comes back again brings his raft to shore. Again, those who are open to the journey ride with them. It strengthens our faith when we can be in the proximity of someone who's traversed the journey to the ocean. It strengthens our capacity to traverse the journey ourselves.